Okay. All right, here we go. So we're going to use Photoshop today. So this is Photoshop Element, not Photoshop Elements. This is Photoshop CC. Now I've grabbed one of Maya's photos. That's okay, Maya. These are one of your pictures here. There's some tools that we can use to improve photos. Sometimes photos are taken in less than ideal lighting circumstances, right? And when that happens, sometimes your subject might be too dark. You know, in this case, Mr. Hewson is a little bit darker than we want, but the background is also very light. So there's a couple tools that we have to use. First off, we'll just review the ones that we usually use. To brighten a picture, if the overall picture is too dark, we go to Image, Adjustments, Levels, and we do that thing where I told you to bring the levels up to the edge of the mountain. So that's the highlights there. These are the dark tones. If we look, this is what the photo used to look like now. It looks a little brighter. Okay. But our subject is still too dark. Mr. Hewson is still kind of covered in shadow because there's a bright light source behind him. So if I were to brighten this thing, I could brighten Mr. Hewson a bit, but what happens to the background? Gets all washed out, right? So this is not the right answer here. I can't do this. To brighten Mr. Hewson is to sacrifice the entire photo. The background's actually not bad. The light levels on the lockers, the walls, the door is actually pretty good. And I'm not even concerned if it is a little dark. I just need to get Mr. Hewson a little brighter. So I'll do my regular levels adjustment. And now I'm going to do some fine tuning. So the first tool I want to show you is called the Dodge tool. Dodge tool is located here. It's actually this thing that looks like a push pin. What it does is it allows you to adjust a specific area of the photo. So we see we have a little circle here. This is called your brush, this little circle. Now, if I want to adjust Mr. Hewson's face, this brush is too small. I want to use something a little bit bigger. So I go up here to my brush palette. I'm going to click on this. It gives me a bunch of different brushes. They come in different sizes, different sort of textures. These are sort of fuzzy. So imagine a brush that has really firm bristles in the middle and soft bristles on the edges. I'm going to go for one that's fairly firm all around. You see my brush is a little larger, but it's still too small. I'm going to now adjust the size from 65 pixels to, I don't know, say about 250. It's a little too much. I'm going to go down to about 240. I like my brush size to be just slightly smaller than the thing I'm trying to brighten. I might even think that's even a little too large still. I'm going to go down to 220. There we go. A little bit smaller. Okay, now I'm going to adjust this photo. So what this tool is going to do is it's going to brighten things. Now, this is where I choose what do I want to brighten. Do I want to brighten the shadows, the midtones, or the highlights? I'm going to start with the highlights. And what this is going to do is it's going to brighten the lightest pixels in the area that I'm brightening. My exposure is listed at 50%, which is too much. It's going to be too radical an adjustment. It's going to look weird. So I'm going to bring this thing down to something a little more modest, around 20%. That's close enough. And now all I'm going to do is I'm going to hold my button down and I'm going to brush this on. Did you see that? What happened just there? Let me just show you. I'll go back. In Photoshop, if you click on Windows, there's a little window here called History, and it records every single thing you did with a photo. So that's before, that's after. If I didn't like what I did, I can go backwards and say, okay, I'm going to go back to this stage here. So you notice how quickly that happened? It was pretty fast. If my exposure was even higher, let's say I used it at the 50% default, what's going to happen when I use this, it's just going to go on that much faster. In fact, too much. And if you zoom into the photo, you'll notice, okay, like this finger is radically different than the rest of his hand and his arm. So you got to be careful with your exposure. That's why I say it's best to go really low. Go really low. It's like makeup. When you put on makeup, you don't cake it onto the brush. You just put it on a little bit at a time. You say, okay, that's what I had before. This is what I have after. So it's not perfect. You may notice there's a little bit of a difference between the ends of his fingers here and the rest of his hand. Again, maybe my exposure is just too strong. Maybe I should try something like a little more subtle, like 6%. And it gives me a little more time to just move this tool around to get the effect that I want. Again, if you look back at our original, that's what he looked like. This is how he's improved. So what I've done is I've improved just the part of the photo that I want to improve, right? Not the whole thing. So I haven't adjusted, I haven't screwed up the background by fixing Mr. Houston. Now, if you look at him, I can see a little more on my computer screen than you can on this screen, but his face is actually a little too bright here. So I would probably go back and do this again until I got it right. Another scenario is where if you have something that's too bright. And this can be a really subtle thing. So here we have a picture of Naya here. You see the little area, little shine on her forehead here? And there's a bit of a shine under her eyes. If we want to adjust that, again, if we do a levels adjustment, which we should do to begin our photo, okay, we're going to bring this thing up, bring this thing down. That actually increased the shine a little bit. The picture has the right amount of light, but I want to get rid of this shine. I'm going to zoom in a little. And I'm going to use the opposite of the dodge tool. It's called the burn tool. So you click on the dodge tool here, hold the button down. There's the burn tool. Again, I've got a little brush here, maybe a little bit smaller than I want. I'm going to go back up to something a little larger, maybe make it 90 pixels. And I'm going to darken these areas. Now, when you use the burn tool, typically we darken the midtones. We try to bring up the midtones to something a little darker. Again, don't do it too fast. Bring down your exposure to something slow, like this. Now, that didn't work. I just got like a dot on her head there, so that's no good. Let's go back. Let's bring that thing even lower, 2%. I can work a little bit under the eyes here, a bit on the nose, a bit over the eye. Especially when you get people that are perspiring and you take their picture, you can get a little bit of shine and look really flattering. So it seems like I didn't do very much, but if you go back to the original, you see the shine there under her eyes? I go back to what I did. We just took the shine off. This picture really doesn't need a lot adjusting. Sometimes you're going to get a picture that's a little more dramatically affected, and you need to do more. Now, in terms of what you can and can't do, this area right here, where you have an area that is basically pure white, you can't fix it. You can't create color out of white, right? At least not in Photoshop. So if you try to burn that, all it's going to happen is it's just going to get like kind of dark around it, but the white areas will never be adjusted. You can try doing this on the highlights. It just isn't going to happen. It can't figure out what color to put there, and you're just going to get a weird dot. So some pictures can't really be adjusted, but if there's a little bit of pigment that you can see, there's a little bit of color, like this patch right here. It's not pure white, there's a bit of color. I can darken that. Watch it darken away. See that? Now I ended up blending the rest of it, partly because I was doing highlights. So let me try that in midtones. Looks a little better. I would probably use a smaller brush too, just to focus on the area that was too bright. So you can fix some areas, you can't fix others. The dodge tool is a little more effective than the burn tool in terms of transforming a photo. So that's the dodge and that's the burn. The last tool I'm going to show you today is called the quick selection tool. Let's just try a different photo here. Okay, I think Grace, I'm going to use one of your photos, if you don't mind. Let's see, let's go back to where I was. Actually, you know what? I think Alyssa, your photo of the Halloween person, is that in your wallflower folder? Yeah, okay. If you don't mind, I'm going to use that one because I think we did this with it. No, it's already been edited. Hang on. I'll go back to the top 10. Okay, so Grace got this picture here. Again, we have our subject is a little too bright. The background's almost perfect. So how do I adjust this? How do I darken my subject without darkening the background? This is going to be a bit tricky because if I do that, if I darken everything, my background's not going to look right anymore. So if I say, okay, let's just bring down this, I want to get the subject dark. Now my background's too dark. It doesn't look right. Let's say I just want to work with my subject. I can use the dodge or the burn tool how I wish, but it's not precise. A more precise tool is called the quick selection tool. It's up here. We go quick selection. And with this tool, you select the areas that you want to change. Now this tool works really well when you have a fairly uniform image that you can separate from the background. So go back to my quick selection right here. I'm going to try to first select her finger. So see how it's selecting her hand now, her finger, her arm, down this part here. Now I did select areas that I didn't want, so I'm going to go to the minus selection here, and I'm going to take out those areas that I didn't want, holding the button down here. I'm going to deselect these areas. I don't want to select them. It's not part of Sydney. All right, I don't want to change this, but I do want to change her arm. Okay. Let's just zoom out a little. Okay, let's say I just want to change the arm. Well, there, I'm going to try to change the whole subject. I think I can do this. I'm going to go back to the plus. Now I'm going to select the shirt. Again, the more you have a distinction between your background and your subject, the easier this is. The quick selection tool will try to identify shades and colors that are common and try to select them quickly. It's not perfect. It really only works when you have some difference between background and foreground. See, I accidentally selected a bit of this red devil here, so I'm going to deselect that. I'm going to take out the red, take out this little bit of brown here, a bit of stuff up here, a little more red devil here. Okay, so that's almost perfect there. And then I got a bit of this white here. I want to get rid of that. Okay, so now I've got Sydney pretty much perfectly selected. A little bit extra up here. Okay, now we're pretty much perfect. Now I can just adjust Sydney with the levels adjustment. I just have my subject here. I'm going to now go to image, adjustments, levels. Now I'm just going to adjust her. I can bring down the light here. I can maybe just darken the midtones a little bit. And then if I hit the preview, see, this is what I had. This is what I have. So I've given Sydney a little more contrast. See how her arm is a little washed out here? Shirt's a little washed out. We've just given a little more definition. Now it's a bit dark here. So maybe I went a little too far with this. Maybe I'll bring up my shadow a little bit and just bring down the midtones a bit. I even find that probably because either this bright sunlight or the flash was used, that Sydney looks a little washed out here. I can add a little bit of color to this. I can go to, I can adjust the hue and saturation, and I can increase the saturation on Sydney a little bit. That's what I had, what I have. So just add a little more color to Sydney. Maybe that's a little too much. I'll make it at 5. All right. Let's say I want to change the background now. I'm like, okay, I've adjusted Sydney. Now I want to do the background separately. If I go to select, I go to inverse, it's now selecting the opposite, everything but Sydney. Now I can adjust my background separately. I can brighten that background, or I can darken it, or I can both brighten and darken it. And now I've got a photo with a lot of contrast. Right? So again, going back to my my history. This is how the photo began. This is how it ended. So you can make these very calculated adjustments, separating foreground from background. You could even do something where, if I really wanted to, I could use some kind of funky Photoshop filter. I could blur the background here. Photoshop lets you do this stuff. I could blur this. Let's see. Okay, I'm not seeing where the blur tool is opening here. Here we go. So I could blur my background like that and not affect Sydney. You can see the area that I clearly forgot to deselect here around that. So you can do a lot of stuff when you separate your subject from the background. Now, we don't do a lot of this stuff in Photoshop, the blurring and that thing, but there are some things that we can do, and using that quick selection tool makes it easier. Okay, so that is the end of our lesson. I thank you for watching my YouTube channel. Please like me on Facebook or whatever they say. I'm going to shut this thing off. I don't have a Facebook page. It's all right. My parents are on Facebook, right? So got to hide that. Okay, I'm going to stop this thing, and we're